our final buys video of the season, because most of you have already had your trade deadline. And so, most of you guys aren't going to be able to make deals after this week. We start, 12th week doing this video. So drop a like for the last buys video if you've enjoyed these videos this year. We will, of course, bring them back for next year. But we're going to give you buys today that are specifically focused on guys that have really good playoff schedules, guys that currently could be buy lows because of injuries, or guys that are stepping into better situations now that we think could have some upside in the playoffs and be potential playoff league winners. So we're going to start with one Jaylen Waddle. Jaylen Waddle is mostly a buy for this video. We had him as a buy a couple weeks ago. But in terms of his playoff schedule, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and Tampa Bay. That 3-week stretch there is very favorable for the wide receivers in this offense. And when you're talking about the wide receivers in this offense, it's really just Jaylen Waddle at this point. Like Malik Washington, I had to start him today in the Flock League. Nah. Not good. It was bad. There's nobody else there that's really being consistent right now. Nick Westbrook-Akine, he is actually dropped in snaps over the last couple weeks as well. And so Waddle's the guy to own there. He still had 7 targets today. Obviously didn't have a touchdown. So had 8 points. So 8 points, and then the bye week, I think you will have some Waddle owners that, especially the ones on the fringe of, not making the playoffs, that will be willing to sell. And if I am a, top seed in my league, if I'm, looking at a top 3 seed in my playoffs, I think Waddle's a great buy right now. He's the wide receiver 11 coming into this week. He'll be a high-end wide receiver 2 after this week. But again, the volume has been there pretty consistently, especially since Tyreek Hill has gone out. And the production has also been there. He has touchdown upside. The Dolphins have actually not been bad. But even just looking at some of the weeks before the playoffs, they have the Saints after the bye, and then the Jets. And then they have Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and Tampa Bay. So really, you're talking about the last 5 games that are very favorable for these Dolphins wide receivers and these Dolphins weapons. And so with Waddle, I think he is a guy that if you can flex him, you feel very, very good about flexing him. In start 7, start 8 leagues, that might be like achievable. But even in deeper leagues, I think he's a great flex option. I think he's a great trade target right now. Now, let me just give you a couple prices here real quick. Let's look at where he's ranked rest of the season on the site on average. He's ranked in the same tier as guys like Michael Pittman, Devontae Smith. I would personally Smith is probably the exception. I would trade Pittman for Waddle pretty easily. Chris Olave, maybe. George Pickens, maybe. Zay Flowers, maybe. So, like, those guys, but any of these guys, T. Higgins, A.J. Brown, Marv, Tet, Cortland Sutton, DK, Stephon Diggs, any of the guys in the D tier there you can trade for Waddle. I'm absolutely doing it. Maybe you probably have to add a piece on top of those D tier guys, so T. Higgins plus a little bit, A.J. Brown plus a little bit, which is totally fine. But I am, willing to pivot from some of the guys in the C tier to Jaylen Waddle because of his playoff schedule, because of how favorable it is. And the guys in the D tier, I'm willing to add a little bit to get to Jaylen Waddle. Again, if you're looking for a high upside and also fairly safe asset on a team that has a very, very easy rest of season schedule, I think Jaylen Waddle is the perfect example of a wide receiver that, because he's on such a bad situation, from an offensive standpoint, from a team standpoint, the playoff schedule being easy actually does make a huge difference for him. And so I'm willing to go buy Waddle. And again, I'll pivot from most of the guys in the C tier, and I'll pay a little bit on top of the guys in the D tier to get to Jaylen Waddle to have in my roster for the rest of the season.
At this point, it's dang near impossible to acquire any running backs that are established bell cow running backs that are going to produce and be the guy, like the number one guy in their respective offense. I literally think the only running back that might be achievable or could be acquired at this point in time is Quinshon Judkins. He's like the only bell cow running back that I can think of that's very talented, that has demonstrated upside in the past and better matchups, and is only going to be available because of how bad his situation is. I mean, you saw Shedeur Sanders come into this matchup against Baltimore and look just as bad as Dylan Gabriel, just as bad as Joe Flacco, just as bad as everybody else in that offense, because this offense is awful. But since that 4-week tear for Quinshon at the beginning of the season, where he had 10, 16, 21, and 13 points, since then, he's scored 3, 26, 4, 10, and 5 points. It's not been good at all. Those 4 matchups were against Pittsburgh, Miami, the Jets, and then Baltimore. Baltimore being like the second half of the season Baltimore defense, which is looking like one of the more lockdown defenses in the league. So when you look at his schedule, Quinshon's schedule for the rest of the season, we have Vegas, who's a bottom team in the NFL. We have San Fran, who, as good as San Fran is as a team in totality, they do have their shortcomings, and that is they don't really have any star players left on the defensive side of the ball because they're all injured. Like, they are a bend-don't-break offense at this point where they're just going to allow a lot of fantasy production every single week. And you saw this with the Cardinals this week. Like, even though San Fran walked all over Arizona, Michael Carter, Mario DiMarcado, and Bam Knight, whoever was getting the ball at any point in time during that game, had plenty of opportunity to produce, and they did. So with Quinshon in that matchup, you're like, okay, you feel pretty good about him being the bell cow running back there and breaking one off and getting a touchdown, having some production there. Then we got Tennessee, Chicago, Buffalo, and Pittsburgh. Like, you don't have to say anything about any of those defenses with the exception of maybe Pittsburgh. Maybe that's a question in the championship week in week 17. I mean, Pittsburgh just let Chase Brown walk all over them as well. Pittsburgh is one of the streakiest defenses that I've probably seen all season, where it's like one game they're forcing a ton of turnovers and look super locked down, and then the next game they look absolutely awful. I would bet that you're probably going to see a decent amount of production from Quinshon in pretty much every single one of these matchups, at least volume. I mean, this is the most promising thing with Quinshon is you've only had one game where he's had less than double-digit touches on the ground, and that was the New England game in Week 8. They're not playing a team rest of season like New England. That's the caliber of New England in terms of what their defense is, their run stopping ability, etc. So, it looks rough for Quinshon, just in terms of that offense, and it's going to merit a very low floor output for him any given week. Like that's why he's available, and that's why he's one of the more achievable guys to go acquire right now in your leagues, who's one of the few guys that's not in a committee backfield. Like nobody else is competing with Quinshon in that offense, and everyone knows that.
All right, I'm focusing on the Eagles' weapons now because, again, looking specifically at the playoff schedule, in weeks 15 through 17 here, Las Vegas, Washington, and Buffalo. So when I'm looking at Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, obviously A.J. Brown's going to be the cheaper of these two, but I'm looking specifically at week 16, which would be the semifinals, which means if you're a 1 or 2 seed, you'd be playing your first playoff game that week. Washington is a great matchup for A.J. Brown. It is a fantastic matchup, and I honestly would be flexing A.J. Brown against Washington in week 16, and so that alone makes him a good buy. Devontae Smith's a wide receiver 15 on the year coming into today. I mean, he's just been really good this year. And, the targets have actually been pretty good since week 5, 10, 5, 11, 9, and 7 targets for Devontae Smith. So, that's pretty solid, given the fact that, the Eagles don't throw that much, and even this year have not thrown that much.
It's been at the expense of Brown.
And A.J. Brown has suffered a little bit. A.J. Brown's target volume, from weeks 2 through 7 was very good, and since then, he missed the game against New York. He had one game against Green Bay where he only had 3 targets. I think A.J. Brown is going to get back on track here at the end of the season. I think he'll have a solid end of the season. I think Devontae Smith will also have a solid end of the season because, again, you're looking at some of these games here. Dallas and Chicago, I expect both of these games to be fairly high scoring and shootouts, and I think both of them will get plenty of work. Then you get to the Chargers in week 14. The Chargers are a decent matchup, honestly. But then, 15, 16, and 17, again, that 3-game stretch in the playoffs, the fantasy playoffs, you could pretty much pluck any weapon out of this Eagles offense and say to buy them. You could also apply the same thing to Saquon Barkley. It's a little bit riskier, obviously, with Saquon, but that being said, I think that these matchups in the playoffs are good for the running back there and good for the wide receivers. And so, Smitty, A.J. Brown, and Saquon Barkley, if you are a top seed looking to go get guys who have a little bit more friendly playoff schedules, I think these are the guys to go for. Obviously, Devontae Smith's going to be a little bit more pricey. And I think because of that, I'd probably rather buy A.J. Brown just because at price, I think he's a better investment, given the fact that he is going to be valued very low now after these last couple disappointing weeks. Obviously, we're recording this before the Week 11 game. But regardless, I think these Eagles, they have a very favorable playoff schedule. If you can go buy them, I think they're great buy candidates right now in fantasy football.
I think Emeka Egbuka is a pretty solid guy to target as well for Tampa Bay. Look, we've alluded to this in the past, talking about Bucky Irving and how much of a difference he makes for just what that offense looks like as a whole when he's on the field. And Bucky was limited in practice this week. He was close to coming back in that Buffalo game. They ended up sitting him out for probably one more week, and then we got the Rams coming up in week 12. I mean, I think you're looking at Bucky Irving's return being this coming week against the LA Rams, and I think it's wheels up for every relevant fantasy asset in that offense, including Bucky. But with Emeka, the reason I think he's such a big buy is because over the last 5 weeks, he's only had one double-digit game and only one touchdown. So you did see that natural touchdown regression, and I'm not going to say that those touchdowns are going to go back up and be to the level that they were in the first 5 weeks of the season where he had 5 touchdowns, right? I'm not saying that he's going to get one every single week. What I am saying is that he's after the Rams playing Arizona and New Orleans, and then he's got Atlanta, Carolina, and Miami for your playoffs. Those are all scrubs. Every single one of those teams are scrubs in terms of the production that they allow to fantasy wide receivers, with the exception of maybe Miami. Miami actually has a pretty decent passing defense. But again, when you're playing a team of the caliber of the Tampa Bay Bucks, once we get to week 17, like that's I think Egbuka is going to be fine. You're talking about like maybe some lower level number one top options at wide receiver that you'd be a little more concerned about when they go up against a team like Miami, say like Zay Flowers or like a Romeo Dobbs or something like that. But with Egbuka, like he's an elite talent, right? And you're going to have a team like Miami, who's just ultimately pretty depleted, is going to struggle there. Not to mention they did trade away one of their top defensive players, which I do think makes their defensive outlook for the rest of the season look pretty tough. So I wouldn't worry too much about that playoff matchup. But again, the rest of this year, I mean, Arizona, New Orleans, Atlanta, Carolina, that's 5 division matchups where they've just been walking all over those guys all season long over the last 5 years. And I think you're going to have a pretty nice outing for Emeka to finish the year really, really strong.
All right, I'm focusing now on Omarion Hampton, who, they have the bye week next week, and I do think he probably returns in week 13, but he is going to be slow when he returns in week 13, so I wouldn't expect a lot of him. But Kimani Vidal is also hurt, so I mean, when Hampton is back and ready, like they're going to give him every snap again. That is no question going to happen. Now, if you have a team with Omarion Hampton like mine in the Flock League, where I'm still like within a game of 500 here, cannot believe I am below 500 at this point, but I am. And, I'm just holding him. I'm holding him through the bye week. I don't even care. But you might have a team that needs to sell Omarion Hampton this week and can't afford to hold him this week and then in week 13 when he's coming back off of that injury. And so because of that, I think you can go try to get him if you are, again, a 1 or 2 seed. I think he was a great buy, a while ago, but him being on a bye this week, I still think there's an opportunity to get him. And you're looking at his playoff schedule. Obviously, week 15, it is tough against Kansas City. But then Dallas, that Dallas matchup in week 16, I need a fully healthy Omarion Hampton in the semifinals of my fantasy playoffs. And it would be very nice for you as well. And then Houston in week 17 is not a terrible matchup either. And so I actually like that one as well. The Kansas City one, again, that stinks. But again, that's why Omarion Hampton, if you're buying him, is primarily a buy for 1 seeds or 2 seeds in the playoffs. Teams that are going to get a buy, where you can avoid that Kansas City matchup and then have Omarion Hampton on your roster for those next 2 weeks. It also gives him another week where you don't need him and he can continue to get healthy. And so with Hampton, I mean, the latest that we've heard on him is that he's been working on a side field. He's not in a boot anymore. And so again, with another week of rest, I expect him to be back after week 12 in week 13 against the Las Vegas Raiders. It's the Raiders and then the Philadelphia Eagles the last 2 weeks before the playoffs. The Eagles are actually not a terrible matchup, and the Raiders are a great matchup. But the problem is, again, he's just coming back off that injury. And so because of the favorable schedule, if you are a 1 or 2 seed in your playoffs, or you have a bye, whatever your playoff format may be, I think Hampton, if you can go get him, is probably worth his price that he's still going at. I still think he's a little bit undervalued and will be until he actually returns to the field because of the impending bye week. And so go get Hampton. And I'm looking at that week 16 matchup against Dallas. That's the week that I want him in my flex spot in the playoffs.
The only thing I enjoyed more than watching George Kittle and CMC dominate today like they usually do was seeing Brock Purdy come back and play like the Brock Purdy that we all know and love. And it was nice to see him play like that, so that everybody can shut up about Mac Jones being the same as Brock Purdy. Like they're not. Brock Purdy is he is so vital to the upside of this offense and the success of every fantasy asset there. It doesn't matter if CMC has 2 touchdowns on the ground any given week. Purdy is still going to have a floor of like 15 points. And you saw that today against Arizona. I mean, they had 41 points. He had 2 touchdown passes to George Kittle alone. He had 3 touchdown passes total on the day. Only threw the ball 26 times, again, in a game where they were controlling the pace of the play most of the day, and they really didn't need to pass the ball that much. And again, he still had 19 points. You've got Carolina and Cleveland over the next couple of weeks. You're going to be looking at a pretty tough matchup there for CMC specifically in that run game against Cleveland. But after the bye, again, the playoff schedule is what we care about here. This is mainly a playoff-centric investment. Tennessee, Indy, and Chicago. Tennessee, again, you've seen what they allow in terms of production to wide receivers, to quarterbacks every single week. With Indy, they have Sauce Gardner, but they are another one of those bend don't break defenses where they are going to allow quite a bit of production in the air specifically. And again, you would expect Buckner to be back at that point. So the run defense is going to be pretty stout at that point again. So I think you're going to see a lot of Brock Purdy having to use his arm quite a bit in that matchup. And then we got Chicago, right? And Chicago is more of like a turnover machine on the defensive side of the ball, but they actually allow a lot of fantasy production as well. They're very dependent on their turnovers. So with those 3 matchups, I mean, that's pretty much a dream. That's one of the more ideal fantasy productive matchups for quarterbacks at the tail end of the season when you're looking at a playoff run.
All right, I'm going to give you a quick one. Dalton Kincaid, if you need a tight end, I think he's going to be sold low because of the injury. And, he didn't play this week versus Tampa Bay. But neither did Keon Coleman because he was a healthy scratch, and that dude was on the sidelines like dancing. He literally does not care. That was always going to be the case with Coleman. And so I think, Kincaid's very important to this offense. They, turn to a bunch of different names that aren't going to be relevant for the rest of the season. And Kincaid has been pretty good this season. He's just been inconsistent. It's literally every other game with Dalton Kincaid. He's got Cincinnati in week 14, which is nice. New England in week 15 is tough. Cleveland in week 16 is a fine matchup. And then Philly in week 17 is also fine for him. This is mainly if you need a tight end like I do, because I just lost Sam Laporta. I think Kincaid's a decent buy candidate just because, again, he is going to be sold a little bit low because of the injury, and that receiving core is a mess, but we still obviously see what Josh Allen is capable of doing on a game-to-game basis. And any weapon in that offense that is going to get any semblance of consistent target volume is worth a roster. I mean, again, he's pretty much the same thing as Laporta in the sense that he's not going to be consistent, but he's on such a good offense, he's going to have crazy boom games. And so if you lost Laporta like I did, I think Kincaid's like a decent fill-in. With the uncertainty around the wide receiver situation there in Buffalo, I think it makes him an even better buy at the moment.
Yeah, and then one more guy here. You could call him a buy / waiver pickup. I mean, he's only 19% rostered right now on fantasy teams. Luther Burden out of Chicago. His usage and snap share has pretty much just been going up and up and up every single week. So I think with him, you're really just looking at everything coming together at the end of the season, the last third of the season. It is like you have a mix of tough matchups, easier matchups like Pittsburgh, great, Philly, great in terms of pass defense, Green Bay, Cleveland, Green Bay, tough, San Fran, that's pretty solid. But again, like Green Bay is known more for their run defense as opposed to their pass defense. Same with Cleveland as well. They'll allow a little more in the air as opposed to what they'll allow on the ground generally. But with Burden, he had 5 targets this week against Minnesota. You're not going to get a ton out of his production to start the season. What we care about is his snap share going up and his opportunity going up as DJ Moore just continues to be essentially a non-factor in that offense. I think they really want to and are planning on implementing Burden more and more and more every single week as the trust between him and Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson increases over time. So if you can snag him, if you have a roster spot, go ahead and do that off waivers.
All right, again, let us know in the comments. I mean, we're trying to kind of figure out, I don't think buys are going to be helpful after this week. I'm not sure buy, sell, hold is at that point either. So we'll continue to do our weekly rankings, our rest of season rankings, but let us know if there are any other types of videos you think would be helpful. Drop in the comments. We'll try to fill in some of our other video slots with anything you guys think is helpful. But drop a like. Again, we appreciate you guys and for watching this video all season. Obviously, you make some, you miss some, but I feel like, for most of these videos, we had a fairly decent track record this year, honestly, and trying to ride out the waves in what has been just a crazy injury-riddled season. So, but we appreciate you guys more than anything. So again, we love you. We'll see you here with a video tomorrow.